January might seem like it's a long way away, but let's be honest, it's really not. So now's a good time to tell you to mark your calendar for January 12th through the 13th for our East Coast Produce Expo at the JW Marriott Turnberry Resort and Spa in Aventura, Florida. And because you're a fan of the Packer podcast, I've got a special offer for you. You can use the code THEPACKER200 to get $200 off your registration for the event. You know I'll be there, and you never know, there might be some kind of fun Packer podcast thing that we do. So just use the code THEPACKER200 to get $200 off your registration fee. Hope to see you there. Welcome to the Packer Podcast. I'm your host, Christina Herrick, and I sit down with leaders and disruptors in the fresh produce industry who are reimagining how we grow, move, and deliver fresh fruits and vegetables in a changing world. Joining me today is Walt Duflock, Senior Vice President of Innovation for Western Growers. Walt, thank you for joining me. I've talked to you before. I know this is just going to be a great conversation. So I'm really looking forward to having you on. I'm sorry it's taken so long, but this is going to be a lot of fun.
Christina, I agree. Looking forward to it. Glad to be here. And thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, I really thought a great place to start is just kind of talking about when we talk about innovation. FIRA just happened not too long ago. You were there. I unfortunately couldn't make it given the fact that I was already in California the week before. So tell me a little bit about it. What was it like? What was the buzz? What was the general feeling?
Yeah, no, and it is funny. IFPA and FIRA back to back do make it interesting, right? You get to sort of talk to folks at the big show in Anaheim, come up to FIRA. We put a couple thousand people into play in the automation space for FIRA, so it was great. It was our fourth year doing FIRA. We really started it with one main mission, right? Help these startups get a chance to talk to these growers in the environment that we know is the most conducive to good things happening between startups and growers in the field in a live demo environment outdoors. And so we had 3 days again, great days. Again, we got lucky on the weather. We had 3 great days outdoors. We had a great crowd. We had the best demo area we've had. We figured out that the fairgrounds, the county fairgrounds in California, are perfect venues for this because you have lots of walking around space, lots of places to put startups who want to show stuff off, lots of places to put a demo area where you can show actual live production environments with machines in them, and plenty of places to have both press conferences, robot challenge awards. There's just a lot of space and a lot of parking. It makes it really easy to have an event. So we think it was our best FIRA ever. We think the crowd would agree. We think the startups said that. I'll be honest, the crowd was a little lighter than we liked, a little lighter than last year, and I think that has something to say about the space. I think the amount of incremental improvement each year in the automation space and specialty crops is significant, but because I watch it closely, right? If you're not watching that closely, you could easily say a lot of these companies were here last year. Some of them made some nice improvements. Some new companies are here this year, but maybe it's not a must-have every year. So we could talk about this whenever, but we are gonna look to move the event around. But we thought Woodland and Yolo County Fairgrounds was again a huge hit for our second year there. We thought the demo area was our best. We really appreciated John Deere and some other partners bringing stuff like the autonomous 5ML to put autonomy front and center because that's something California Ag needs to help with some jobs. And then we had great press conferences on FIRA USA itself and where we're going on Reservoir Farms, our partners at Reservoir Farms with John Deere, and Ag Tech Alliance, where we're doing things to fundraise because guess what? Venture capital has shrunk by 80%. We better come up with some new ways to do things with some new capital sources. And that's what Ag Tech Alliance is all about. So a lot going on at FIRA. And I'll stop there. That's the headlines, but it was a great show.
That's great. Yes. Well, we definitely should talk offline next year about, whether or not that's something I could swing. Obviously, if it's going to be around the same time as IFPA, that's a little hard to do when it bounces around. Won't be in Orlando for IFPA next year. So, it might be tough, but, I still think it's valuable. I think being able to have a place where everyone in, well, arguably, you and I can kind of get into the nitty gritty, but I feel like there's a space devoted to ag tech and it's like several days of just ag tech where, other shows, there might be some woven in bits and pieces, but, in my mind, that was like the epicenter of ag tech for a few days in the US. So, yeah, interesting there. So, I brought you on, and I feel like part of the conversation that I want to have with you is in your title. So it's almost perfect. I want to talk about innovation. Obviously Western Growers has been um a major part of fueling innovation, being a part of innovation, keeping tabs on innovation. So talk about kind of that unique role that Western Growers brings, being part trade organization, kind of helping to drive change, helping to connect different folks in entities. Just kind of talk about, what Western Growers role plays with innovation in specialty crops.
Yeah, no, and it is a unique one because of our organizational structure. We are, I mean, it's funny, my high tech friends are like, wait, you went to what, an insurance company? And there's no stock play here, there's no equity. What are you doing? And I have to remind them, no, no, this is the perfect spot. And that's because Western Growers is that is that association that advocates, but then an insurance and benefits business that creates some cash flow that funds Western Growers innovation. And so as a result, I get to be in a fairly unique position within the industry because we have capital to do some really cool stuff, like partner with Reservoir Farms and bring some capital, 250,000 to the table, and more coming. Um, but more than that, we have the ability to sort of set the stage because my growers are the key asset, right? If you want access to my growers, you've got to come through us because there's too many startups out there, right? Think about my two key spaces: automation to help with labor, and biologicals, regenerative ag, and genetics to help with chemistry pressures, right? There's 2,000 plus startups in just those two categories. I've got 2,300 members. There's no way that any of them can take calls from all 2,000 vendors and talk to them about, hey, tell me about your math. Tell me about your pest problems. Tell me about your labor problems. How's it going? Are you using H2A, right? Are you leasing or buying equipment? How's that work? Do you want it as a service? There's no way that can scale. So part of my charter 5.5 years ago was, okay, let's come in and set the stage. Let's focus on these two problems. Let's help the startups understand that we are a useful filter on the way to those growers, and let's build the tools to make that funnel effective, right? So FIRA USA is one of them, right? We get people together for 3 days in one space with the right folks, that everyone can talk in one place. So the events business is great. We like 1 day events with our UCA and our partners. We like FIRA USA. We'd like to see 2 day events, right? And stuff like that where automation's the focus. Anytime you can get the key stakeholders together, we're happy to play a role. So we sponsor other events. We help with other events. We participate in other events. The other thing we do is we do things like field trials and case studies, and look for more news from this segment in the next coming months. So field trials are a key part of this because if you were to go ask a grower, hey, help me out with a couple acres, help me out with a couple months of free planting, help me out, then the growers are going to lose their mind, right? It's just too much. And a lot of them do help, but again, not to the scale where 2,000 startups can get their stuff done. So this is where Reservoir Farms is a big idea. You've got commercially grown acreage that automation startups can use to demo and trial their stuff 24/7, 365, not just the 3 days of FIRA and not just at a UCNR site once in a while, all the time. You can demo and you can trial. And so our job is to basically set the stage and say labor is a $16.3 billion expense at about $20 an hour for 850 million hours of farm labor in California. And 1/3 of that is harvest, and 2/3 of it's not harvest. And then we work hard to get the 1/3 of harvest that's out there, or sorry, the 1/3 of non-harvest, the weeding, thinning, planting, spraying, out there at scale. We help them trial. We do case studies. We write up this stuff. And we give them tools like Startup Toolkit where you can learn from growers without talking to growers because we've captured all the data you need to go ahead and get started on your R&D and your early stage efforts without actually needing to talk to a grower. So I used to say when I was an accelerator, talk to a grower all the time. I've now pulled that back and said, talk to Western growers and we'll help you talk to growers when it's time. So that's our role, is to kind of be the chief coordinator, the general manager, if you will, of the space, and help those startups understand, what do you need to know at the start? What do you need to know when you go into trials? What do you need to go that first time you talk to the grower? And what do you need to show that grower in terms of economics that shows them your tool can come in and help them, not just by doing the job, but by doing the job in economics that work for them. So we can talk through the case studies, now or later, but I think they've been a key part of this. Helping the growers and the startups get on the same page with economics has been a pretty big idea.
Well, yeah, and that's so interesting. That you went from encouraging these startups to talk to growers immediately to then kind of helping filter because probably better than I do, and even I know a little bit. Is you alluded to it? Growers are so busy and have so much on their plate already that to have to sift through a lot of pitches to find what's actually going to be beneficial to them is really tough. And I think that's the one challenge to the ag tech space has been there's a lot of great ideas out there. And as I've said, it's kind of the rubber hits the road moment. We know the needs there, we know that's not going away, and so now it's got to really be impact. So speaking of
Yeah.
that, I'm really curious, with your work with startups, how do you talk to them about impact and like where those ideas should be in terms of like delivering results to growers. Like I realize growers probably want things immediately, as I would too if I were running a farm, right? I would want a piece of equipment to come on and immediately start paying me back because I've put some time and investment into that. But like, talk to me a little bit about that way that you work with these startups and I guess growers to some extent to kind of level set expectations, I guess you could say.
Definitely. And you're right. It's level setting on both sides, right? For the startups, it's like always a journey, but it's even more a journey in ag tech, right? So I've been a startup operator for like 30 years. And ag tech is by far the toughest space. I played in e-commerce, I played in search, played in local advertising, played in enterprise data centers. Um, no space requires more patience than ag tech. And that's the one thing startups don't always get a lot of, right? Because if you took venture capital money and you've got venture capital board members breathing down your neck to deliver, 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 it can be really tough. So the first thing we tell startups is listen, play for the long game and build a product that is going to do the job no matter how long it takes. Because if you try and shortcut anything in ag tech, especially specialty crop, it's a small community. And you would be surprised how often folks will talk about, oh, yeah, I was down at breakfast at the pub with a couple of guys. And we were talking about some stuff that didn't work. And inevitably, it's not always the stuff that does work that gets shared everybody with everybody widely. It's quite often the stuff that didn't work. So they'll warn their friends off of taking some bad pass, but they may hold the good stuff a little closer to their chest. Fair enough, right? And so we work really hard with startups to help them understand what you say to investors is oftentimes not going to look anything like what you say to growers. Now, your job as a founder is to make sure that the vision you're pitching to the guys who write checks is going to get lined up with the product reality that you sell to the grower and make revenue off of. But that's not the same conversation, right? What you need to tell the grower is, look, I understand your labor is a problem. I understand you're using primarily H2A. I understand that that's in California a $30 an hour cost because of all the transportation, lodging, and food that comes with that type of labor. And I have put this robot into play in a couple places that look like your operation where we've saved them 200, 300, 400, 800,000 in the case of carbon robotics in weeding labor in a year. And so whatever you're heading down the path towards startup, you need to be able to get to the point where you can do that type of statement. I can save your operation based on what I know about your operation. And from folks I've worked with that look like your operation, I can help you improve your economics by roughly this much. And I'd like to get a chance to talk to your team and run some trials so we can make sure that this actually works. And so for startups, it's a lengthy process to do ag tech. I just need to make sure they're locked and loaded and ready with the capital structure that's going to work, with a product roadmap that's going to work, and with the patience that they're not going to talk to growers on day one or day three, or maybe even day 300, but we'll get them ready. And when they're ready, we'll definitely share. So that's the trick for startups is we're one of the slower moving spaces. So people just have to adjust their timeframes and expectations on that side.
And I think we've had conversations too about, unfortunately, some startups try to be not necessarily everything to everyone, but there might be, you might want to try a couple crops as opposed to, following the Ron Burgundy where you focus on one thing and do it well instead of two things and doing it half as well. That's I'll say that the PC way.
Love the Ron Burgundy reference. Totally right. And I would say that that is the challenge area. So if you think back to normal tech and the way that we roll things out, the important thing startups need to know is prove a beachhead, prove that you dominate a space that's new and that's yours. And so same thing for ag tech, right? And Burrow's a great example. If you look at Charlie and Burrow, Charlie's a great founder, great CEO, running a great team with a great product. I'm a big fan. And Charlie was told early on, and some good advice by Kirk Haney, my friend over at Radical Ventures. He said, listen, you could do a lot of things with Burrow. You could do a lot of things in a lot of crop type. He goes, you'll be better served by again going slowly and dominating one segment of the market, one niche, if you will. And that niche, that beachhead for Charlie, turned out to be table grapes and harvest assist. So for table grapes, the Burrow is really good at taking those grapes from the harvest crew back to the truck autonomously, automatically. It just happens. Saves the crew a lot of time, makes them more efficient. They're not lugging berry crates around. That's been a big win. And he did that for years to get the market right, to get the economics right, to get the product market fit, we call it. And all he did was solve that one thing. Now, fast forward a couple of years, and Charlie's the classic 10-year overnight success story in the making. I think we started working together in like 2016 or 17. And now he's got horticulture. He's got these big pot movers. He's got four different models of burrow. If he had started Burrow with the goal of building those four models out initially, he would have struggled mightily because he wouldn't have proved a value proposition that any grower would sit still for. And so by doing one thing really well, by working with the growers really closely, and by getting the product just right, he was allowed over the course of the next couple of years to build a Burrow XL, a Burrow Grande, a Burrow Contador for the for the lawnmower. Great product naming by Charlie. And so I think that's the approach you have to take. And I trumpet Burrow to a lot of the startups, and I'm like, look, are you prepared to grind in fields and in demos and in show offs and in grower conversations for 6 or 7 years to get this product market fit? And do you have enough capital and a small, tight enough focused team to get there? Because if not, fundraising is going to be tough. We should think about right now, do we need to recalibrate things early? Because the number one thing we can do for startups is help them avoid bad paths and help them avoid something where they're going to be forced to fundraise before they're ready, and the investors are going to shake them off and give them a hard pass.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. So I'd love to kind of get your perspective from on the grower side of things, because you know we've talked a little bit about the tug and pull of innovation and growers, and that's nothing new. But you know, is there one, or are there multiple? What are some of those barriers that you see to innovation adoption among growers? Is it some of that getting snake bitten in the past, or like what are you seeing?
So that's a great place to start, right? Is you have to tell all these startups, listen, from the grower's perspective, you're like the last 12 guys sitting in that chair going, I got this new thing, right? And it's not your fault as a startup founder that these 12 guys all blew up and their startups didn't make it. And folks remember, and growers have a long memory. But basically, that's part of the message is listen, we've had hundreds to thousands of startups over probably thousands over 20 years for sure. They didn't all make it, and they didn't all go live by the mantra of under promise and over deliver. Some of them went the other way. And so yes, you have growers who have scars from past incidents. You have growers that tried stuff out, rolled it out, tested it, trialed it, bought it, scaled it, integrated their operation, and then stuff happens, right? And it's nobody's fault. It's just stuff happening. Companies get bought, companies shift focus, companies do other things. And so, yes, from the grower perspective, they do see a lot of, I don't want to say snake oil, but in the case of some of the biological stuff, that word gets thrown around with some merit to it. There's where there's some smoke, there's some fire on that one. But even in the case of automation, right? Folks are going to want to try you on 5 or 10 acres, bring you back on 20 to 40 acres. It's going to take a couple cycles to get through. So the growers basically see all these automation solutions. We'll stay on robotics for a minute. They see all these robotic solutions and they're like, okay, where is that going to save me time? And what can I do with that time that I've saved? Right. Because they're not looking at it as I want to remove good farm workers from the farm. They want to help them be more efficient. Right. So if we go back to that laser weeder study I mentioned, the carbon robotics case study, what Braga Fresh was looking for was help me automate some of this weeding option, this weeding project, this weeding all over my ranch, so that I can help that labor do other things. And so what you ended up with is year one, we took a look, we worked with Braga. So I mean, this is how long this stuff takes to roll out, right? You roll it out, and then it takes a year to measure the labor, year to measure the robot. So, and we went back and looked at some of the numbers and validated them. We ended up with a year one number for 3,200 certified organic crop acres across 8 different specialty crops. And we said, what was year one with the labor alone? $2.1 million. Then we went to year two and we said, what did the cost change to when we added the robot, the carbon robotics laser weeder? Oh, 1.3 million. So you can now understand that with $800,000 in savings, the best way to pay for a $1.4 million laser weeder is $800,000 a year. And so that's the level of detail that we help the growers get into. We don't want them to change. We tell growers, look, you demand that of the ag tech. We're going to demand that of the ag tech. And so tell the startups, these are my numbers, right? Be open with them about the numbers, because if they're coming in and saying they're going to save your labor force, they're going to save you labor costs, let's hold them to that standard. And so I think that's one of the big things, is telling the growers, no, you're right. You should get down to the economics. You should get down to brass tacks and know those two numbers. And then telling the startups, look, here's an 8-page write-up where we detailed how we did it and how we got the math done. You need to get to this level of detail if you want to sell to growers at scale. Otherwise, they're going to think you can't do it. And so part of my job and part of our team's job is just educating the growers that, yes, you're doing it right. Help share more data with the startups so they can do their stuff for you, with you, and telling the startups, look, if you can't get to this level of detail, you're not there. You're not ready yet. You're not ready to sell yet. You're ready to share your machine. You're ready to demo, but you're not ready to trial or offer a sale to anybody. You're not there. So keeping both sides focused on economics has been one of the big wins of the last couple of years. And the case studies around carbon robotics and stout industrial and mechanical weeding. We just rolled one out last week at FIRA on cal.net with some water efficiencies for Don Cameron and Terra Nova. These 3 case studies really help startups in all segments understand that if I can't get to some line, a line on that grower's financial statement, I have not done my homework yet.
That's really interesting. I think that's a strong point. And I definitely think, the numbers, as we could have an entire podcast about the economics, and
We
obviously,
could.
that's something I'm trying to follow, because the numbers are starting to get to a point where it really matters. It might have been
Right.
something in the years past where adding a piece of equipment was an investment, but it's not to the point where it's really a make or break on whether or not you can actually add that piece of equipment. Um, so I wanted to have you pick your brain a little bit on some advice that you would want to give growers. So, we've talked about how there might be why growers might be reluctant to get involved in the innovation process, right? Just because maybe, things are really tight. Maybe they don't have the time or the bandwidth, and that's kind of where you and Western growers can kind of come in and facilitate and evaluate some startups. But for the grower that does want to get involved in being more tech forward, isn't sure where to start, what's your advice on how they dip their toe into innovation? I guess is a funny way to ask that question.
Yes, no, it's the right way to ask the question, though. And I would say, are you sure? Are you sure you want to be tech forward? And I would point them to groups like Braga Fresh and Taylor Farms, and these are big growers, right, with a lot of capital. They've made the investment for years in things like regenerative ag and testing out the new chemistry products. They've tested out the robots, and I will tell you, they have to put 2 things into the budget every year. They've got to put time. They've got a team that works against these innovation objectives, and they've got to put capital, right? I mean, the capital and time that it takes a group like Braga Fresh to get to 120 acres of now certified with Greener World regenerative ag acreage is a big deal. It takes them years of trying stuff, trying cover crops, trying different watering strategies, trying different tillage strategies. All of that takes time and money, and all of it, and this is the big one for the smaller farmers, involves risk, right? Because if you're changing practices, you're adding costs, and there's no guarantee it works out like you hope, right? Maybe your soil's not the right type. Maybe your water's not the right quality. Maybe you learn something as you're doing this. Maybe the cover crop mix wasn't right. You got to go to a different cover crop. Well, that probably impacted your yield for a season or two, right? Or at least a couple rotations. And so it's really important that growers understand if you're going to be on the early adopter side of that bell curve for growers, you are going to need to spend extra. You're going to need to spend extra time, need to spend extra capital, and the results will vary. And so if to folks who say I want to get on the tech forward side of it, I would say if you're not 100% sure and committed to it for years, I would let the big farmers go first, the big growers go first, and then work their way down the life cycle. Because the way that tech works is it's always a new product with some customizations and tweaks, and then it becomes a more standard product later on. So that early majority to late majority, they don't need all the the wounds and the scars from the early folks, the settlers, if you will, that take on early ag tech. Maybe you're better off to just wait. So I've had conversations with several of our growers that say, you know what, I appreciate the opportunity and the chance to have a conversation with you about going tech forward as a small or medium sized grower. But again, unless you're committed, it's kind of like War of the Roses, where it was it Danny DeVito's the attorney going, unless you're sure, and by the end they don't call me back, which is probably good for both sides. So if that's one of our roles is to help folks understand where they are in the technology lifecycle adoption, and if they're not on the early adopter, don't force it. That's we're happy to play that role.
I think that's really interesting too, because I think it's fair for you to mention, you've got to be willing to put invest in ag tech. It's not necessarily just add this and it makes a difference. I think it's a frank conversation that everyone needs to have. Sometimes I feel
Yeah.
like there might be a little bit of dare I say FOMO, fear of your fear of missing out on
You
some of
dare.
the innovations, right? There might
Yeah.
be some of that where someone might go, oh my gosh, everyone around me is trialing this stuff, am I getting left behind? And I feel like there is some of that in ag, right? There is a turning point where growers do need to innovate because they will get left behind. But like you said, with new additions, when it's still in that evaluation stage, you might end up kind of not having the ability to trial and invest that time and really, you know, be resilient enough to be able to put some effort in there. So that's really interesting advice. So I have one more tough question to ask you before we get to the fun stuff. And I don't know where you're going to go with this, so I'm really interested to hear your answer. But let's talk about the farm of the future. And I realize when I say farm of the future, I'm not telling you what crop, I'm not telling you spacing, I'm not telling you anything. And so you could go a lot of places with it. But thinking about specialty crops in the farm of the future, what does that look like to you, and how far away realistically do you think we are in that future farm?
Yeah, no, it's a great way to tee it up to kind of go 40,000 feet. And I would say it this way. I think the farm of the future is really going to be a mix of a couple things that are already happening, and it'll really be more of a continuum than an endpoint. Like it's not like it's going to happen by 2033 or 2035 or 2037. But I think in the next decade, you're going to see one of two things. The farm of the future, like here's a provocative thought. The farm of the future will be in California if we can create an environment where we have enough adoption of things like automation and biologicals so that farming in California remains economical. But if we force people with these regulatory costs at $1,600 an acre per year, as Lynn Hamilton from Cal Poly will show you, and we're looking at now 10% of our labor force in California is H2A, that's 30 buck an hour, like we said earlier. So you've got all these costs hitting you. The farm of the future depends on the farmer having margins that can grow for the future, right? And so that aside, the regional differences aside, I do think we'll see a lot of robots. I do think we'll continue to see weeding. I mean, the FOMO point is right. When you see all the weeding robots that are out there in Salinas Valley, anyone who doesn't have one is probably wondering why they don't have one at this point, because there are some really good ones out there, and they're at reasonable price points. And you can do spray weeding, you can do mechanical weeding, you can do laser weeding. Oh, they're all kind of options out there in the market. But I would say farm of the future from a 40,000 foot perspective, much more automated with a much more skilled workforce that manages those automation solutions. That's the part a lot of people forget. And that's the part where we work closely with community colleges and four-year colleges in California and across the West to have the students ready and able, ag tech enabled, as we like to say. So you're going to have a lot of robots. You're going to have a lot of ag tech enabled workforce. You're going to have some regenerative ag out there at some scale. You're going to have some biologicals out there complementing chemistry. Again, if you talk to Shane Thomas, he would say the chemistry and biology biologicals probably crisscross. They probably cross over in the 20 to 40 to 2043 timeframe. So you're going to have $100 billion industries in both chemistry and biologicals in the 2040s. So that mix, that portfolio will shift toward more and more biologicals, with chemistry still having its spot, still earning its spot in the rotation. And I think that, so it'll be a gradual thing. It won't be like there's one day where I say, yep, I'm the farm of the future. You'll just continue to see testing, trialing, and demos of new solutions in those key areas. And the other area that I'll mention is water. You'll see some water efficiency out there, like the Don Cameron stuff, like Cal.net, like some drip irrigation. Drip's not everywhere yet, but it's getting rolled out. And now it's got different formats. Do you want 5, 7, or 9 millimeter? Do you want reusable or not reusable? So again, all this stuff doesn't sound super sexy when you talk about like AI and fintech and mobile apps. But in terms of a farm, if I can get more robots to help me with my labor and manage that cost down a little bit, if I can get biologicals to complement the chemistry and do some work on top of my regen ag practices that, again, take time and money, and if I can get some water efficiency so I can do it with, 2 or 3 less wells, or figure out a way to do it with different water efficiencies, that sounds a lot like the farm of the future. And it's kind of ag tech everywhere and embedded all at once.
I think that makes sense. I mean, yes, it's easy to, immediately imagine that. Oh yes, the farm of the future is going to be like the Jetsons, right? And it's just all like, it's just so science based and so sci-fi that like you can't believe it. But I think you're right. It's going to be a lot more incorporating different farming elements. But it is interesting to hear kind of, some of that talk about biologicals. And I've done a little bit of work on that. I feel like I need to follow more, just because that is such a burgeoning industry. And there's actually, we're at a point where products are really making a difference, and they're in growers' rotations already. So,
Right.
but that's a topic for another podcast. We got through the hard stuff, so now I want to get into some of the fresh take questions. Where I feel like, knowing you, I'm really excited. Not to put any pressure on you. Really looking forward to some of these answers, or
I'm
potential.
ready.
All right, so let's start off with an easy one. What's something that people would be surprised to know about you?
So I will share a story back from my eBay days. I was at eBay early in '99. I was there till 2006. A lot of folks know that. Had a few other startups after that. That was the one everyone seems to know, and it's still out there swinging. We just had the 30-year eBay reunion a couple weeks ago at my club, which is crazy to think, right? And we looked okay. Something in the water at Hamilton Avenue. We aged pretty well. But what I would say that folks don't know is, because it's kind of been forgotten, is the program that I ran for 5 of those 7 years was the eBay Trading Assistant program, where it was a "we'll sell it for you" concept.
Huh.
And it was, if you remember the 40-Year-Old Virgin.
I was just going to say that. I vaguely remember that being a thing.
So the height of whatever, 15 minutes of fame I was ever going to get out of eBay was when you're running the trading assistant program. You're at a movie with your wife on date night. you're watching, and it's tough to get a sitter, and so the movie's got to be good, right? Like you're making a big investment at date night when you got 4 kids at home and it didn't yet have our 5th. And so you make the date night investment, you go to dinner, you go to the movie, and then right in the movie, if you'll remember the plot line, the protagonist, it's Steve Carell, Steve Carell's an eBay guy, Steve Carell. His girlfriend or fiance, whatever the status was, she ran an eBay drop-off store. Right. And that was really the most exciting part about the TA program. Was I wanted to get thousands of these drop-off stores across all over the US, because the thinking was nothing would bring eBay to life more than putting hundreds of folks into these stores a day, where they can see eBay, touch the merchandise in eBay. It's a store you can drop stuff off and you can pick stuff up. You can buy. You can imagine the possibilities. And so that was just an unbelievable 5 years worth of run. We had 4 franchise chains out there. We had 1,000 stores ready to open. We had another 1,000 committed to on the franchise side of the business. We had franchisors from other spaces coming over into the eBay drop off space. We really rocked eBay Live in 2005 in Vegas with like all these people in their fancy franchise shirts. And unfortunately, the unfortunate postscript, if I'm being honest, Christina, is I was unable to get adequate marketing resources because we found out that if they couldn't acquire a customer for whatever the numbers were, basically we needed to subsidize the customer acquisition cost for the drop-off stores by about 40%,
Oh,
or it wasn't going to work. They were not going to operate a store successfully economically. And I got some marketing dollars for them in a co-op marketing program, but not enough to make it really happen. So most of those drop-off stores have either gone away. Sadly, a lot of my friends that had to shutter or dropped off of the franchise map, and the franchise chains have gone away. So we had a really hot moment in time, and it's just a reminder that I wasn't able to capture enough of the momentum to keep that thing rolling. But it was a great program. So sorry, long answer, but it was a fun program, and blood, sweat, and tears for 5 years, and it's just an unfortunate ending.
well, that's interesting. I did not expect a 40-year-old virgin movie mention on it's not on my bingo card. I've had a few of those where it's like, well, I didn't expect this conversation to go there. But I do
Nice.
very much remember that being a part of the movie. Which I don't know if that's what that says about me remembering that, but I remember it.
No, it was a
Um,
big part of the plot line. You're right.
yeah. So if you weren't doing what you're doing now, what's a dream job of yours?
Oh, so easy. Senior PGA Tour. I, I would be playing golf professionally. I'm a 12 handicap. I'm nowhere near. You need to be a +4 these days, right? But I will tell you, that being said, I feel like I got to experience a lot of that because this year our friends at John Deere got my colleague Ben Pallone and I back to Moline, back to Deere headquarters, back there for the John Deere Classic and the Pro Am portion of that tournament. And I got to be as close to the pros as you can ever get. And it was Candyland. I was just loving it for the week. So big thanks to Deere for putting that tournament on. It's a great tournament, and big thanks for them getting us in the pro am. And man, if we've already told them if somebody drops out again, we're happily standing by, ready to come back because it's a great experience. They put on a great tournament, and the pros. Everyone says these pros are they're so busy, and the pro ams are not. Our guy Anders Albertson, he was so nice. He was talking to us every hole. He was asking John Deere about some of their products, some of their tractors, and all that. He asked Western growers. He asked Ben and I about some stuff to do with specialty crops. He'd clearly done his homework, and he was clearly engaged for the whole round, and that just made it extra special.
Yeah, I could see where you would enjoy just some of the tech on the golf side. I did a brief stopover on turf and golf. And yeah, golf course management. There's a lot of stuff in there, and some of the golfers even have like some pretty high tech measurements and things. So yeah, I could see
Yeah.
where that might bleed over. Where your interest right now could bleed over into golf.
Yeah. Yeah. So no, I have a great time playing when I can on the weekends, but I understand that my day job is nowhere close to that. But that would be the dream job is life on the PGA, life on the senior PGA tour since I'm now 59.
All
Couldn't
right.
even try and hang with the younger kids.
Well, I'm trying to think. So, what's a random topic that you could give a passionate TED talk about that's not related to fresh produce? And I wonder if these answers are going to go coincide or not.
It's produce adjacent, but I have a nonprofit in Monterey County that does rural advocacy around ag and energy, and we have both of those on our farm. We have cattle, we have oil, we have greens, and we have grapes. And I will tell you that watching California policymakers negatively impact ag and energy at the same time for a couple of decades now, I would love to do a TED talk on the need for vibrant rural economies to be able to leverage their key asset, which is the land. Because when you take away the ability to do lumber efficiently and effectively, and agriculture and energy and mining and all this stuff that the rural economies need to thrive on, I don't know how you build an economy in those places without it. And so I've been very passionate, very advocate driven for a while now on, hey, we need to really rethink our approach to rural across this country. And I love to see like American Dynamism with the Andreessen Horowitz Fund funding all these things that can do these things in rural areas. And I just think if you're going to build these vibrant rural economies we all want, and the one that I'll give you just to drive the point home is when I was a young lad before my folks split, we were on the Imperial Valley Ranch, my dad's ranch, um, in the 70s, and my grandpa was the Chamber of Commerce uh, head for the El Centro Chamber of Commerce for like 50 years. I mean, that's what he did. It's all he did. It's what he was known as. And he created all these great marketing campaigns for El Centro, where the sun spends the winter and all that stuff. That was all grandpa. And so I would spend Saturdays going out to see all the new businesses in El Centro as ag was coming up and production was coming up and ag was growing in the 70s. And you got to see new business popping up every week. If I went out with my grandfather to El Centro right now and he could come back from the grave and we would go out and do that tour, I don't know that we need to see more than one or two businesses a week. They're just not able to open. When you don't have that economy, that rural economy really going, it impacts everything. And I whatever I can do to help folks understand that. So I guess it is very ag adjacent, but that would be my TED talk. Is look, if we're going to revitalize rural economies, it's going to be by helping them, encouraging them, and enabling them to use the land for efficient purposes that can drive capitalism.
All right. I'll let it pass. I keep these ambiguous.
No party
I
foul.
like them. I like them just to be different, right? It's something not quite what we talked about, but similar. Just and again, these are open ended questions. So like, I don't know what anyone's gonna say until I ask them. All right, so we got the last one. So this one, I'd love it if you kept it outside of produce, but I'll leave it up to you. What's something wildly underrated that you think more people should pay attention to?
Fertility rate, and specifically the need to feed the 10 billion. We finally blown that myth up, and I think it impacts all agriculture. We already overproduce in every category, right? We are price takers in almost every agriculture category. Talk to my livestock guys, talk to my dairy guys, talk to my Midwest guys. Everyone's in a price taker position, right? And that price taker position is because we've said for decades, overproduce, overproduce, overproduce. We asked Norman Borlaug to create the Green Revolution, and he did, right? And then everyone got mad at him, which was foolish. So I would say my underrated point is when you look at the need to feed the world in a price taking position for so many agriculture commodities, and you look at that in combination with the fact that the fertility rate, the replacement fertility rate is 2.1. And both the developed and the developing countries, and I was saying this way before Elon got off on this rant. I've had guys like Todd Thurman and Damian Mason talking about this for years. When your fertility rate gets below 2.1, you're going to see some societies actually start to collapse potentially in the next couple of decades if we're not careful. China's one-child policy turns out to be a really questionable policy call because now they're paying people to have kids, and you're like, okay, so we've messed up maybe twice. We'll see. And so, my God, my thought would be help everyone understand that in an environment where we definitely don't get to 10 billion people on the planet, we may not get to nine. We need to rethink a lot of policy decisions because when your policy decisions are encouraging production, 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 when they really need to be pushing differentiation, 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 and premium pricing, we're making a big mistake. And to the extent we put dollars down the production, production, production path, which we're doing in a lot of the Midwest subsidy cases, we should rethink that as quick as we can. And so I appreciate what ethanol has done for the corn folks. I appreciate what 45Z and sustainable aviation fuel may do for them as well. But in the long run, we're going to need to get back to some core underlying economics that do not have production subsidies anywhere in the mix because it's just we're not going to need to feed 10 billion people, and we already grow enough food to feed all the people. It's the distribution and some of the challenges around getting it to the right places and in the right folks when they need it. So the production part is nailed down. We need to stop over incentivizing production. And in the end, we need to get help with underlying economics. So back to my recurring theme here, we need to fund things like automation and things like fancy new chemistry alternatives so folks can differentiate their products and we can have more regeneratively grown differentiated products because again, from the commodity mindset basis, more production is not our friend right now.
Well, you wrapped that up nicely. That I did not expect you to go there, but I think that's the one interesting thing about having conversations with you, Walt, is generally like I kind of know where things are going to go, but then you bring up so many insightful points that it adds to it. So I feel like that's a whole nother path I need to go down and looking into. So thank you for that. Like I think I've said this before. Like I feel like you leave me with more questions than answers, which I think is not a bad thing.
Gives us an excuse to have another podcast.
Exactly. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me. I do really enjoy the conversation. I feel like this is you've brought a lot of really thoughtful points. And like I said, I think we've got an opportunity to talk more.
Awesome. Thank you, Christine. It's been great. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yes. And just as a reminder to everyone tuning in, don't forget, if you like what you see and hear, make sure to subscribe and rate and review the show. We'd love it if you gave us a 5-star review. And thank you for tuning in and for all that you do to keep fresh produce moving from field to table. Thanks again for tuning in. Bye.